Hey, everybody. I want to welcome everybody. We're in Coleman, Alabama for everybody that's online, and we're here to do our third annual MS Symposium here at Coleman. All right, my name is Stuart Schlossman. I'm president, founder of MS Views and News. I too have MS. You all know the story already. Today's program, I would like to thank Sandoz and Novartis for sponsoring us to do this event today, and I hope that you all can give them a round of applause and say thank you as well. All right, so Jessica Thomas is going to speak with you today about relationships and multiple sclerosis. And again, then we will take it to questions, but she'll be speaking, I don't remember, for about 35 minutes, I believe, more or less. All right, take it away, Jessica. Thank you.
Perfect. So I think, Stuart, on the thing, it says 25 minutes, but I'll go as long as I can.
Okay, that's good. 25 is good.
And okay, perfect. And then we will have questions. So as I talk and as you develop any or think about questions, write them down and ask them, because the truth is that often we're thinking of a question that someone else is thinking about, or that inspires somebody else to ask a question. So please, when it's time for questions, let's be ready to ask them. So a little bit about me. I always like to introduce myself in numbers because I think it tells you a little bit about my story and is a little bit more interesting, I think. So 20 is the amount of years that I will have been married this year. So my husband and I have been married for almost 20 years. In September, we'll celebrate our 20th year anniversary. Out of that 20 years, 19 of those years have been with me living with MS. So you can tell that I was diagnosed as a newlywed, and that was something that was really challenging back then. And around that time, I had always been a social worker, but I had decided to work specifically with people living with chronic disease, because it was emotionally challenging for myself. And so 18 of those years, I've been helping people like you living with chronic disease. And then 17 is the number of years that my son turns this year. So so that tells you that that I had a baby after my MS diagnosis. So a little bit about me. That's my professional passion is really to help as best as I can to help people to live their best life with MS, and honestly acknowledge the emotional wellness pieces of this disease, because it can be a challenging disease to live with, not only physically but mentally and emotionally sometimes. So we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about relationships. And why are we going to talk about relationships? Well, MS and disease impacts our everyday lives, and that can impact our relationships. We're going to talk a little bit today about the importance of healthy relationships. We're going to talk a little bit about romantic relationships, but we're also going to talk about just general relationships too. And we're going to talk about communication as well. So why do relationships matter? Well, that's pretty easy. Relationships matter because they're a part of our everyday life. And it's hard to, how we handle relationships helps us, as we walk through the journey of what our days are. So we're going to talk about healthy relationships and the importance of building a support network. Identifying areas of support, either with our family, our friends, through support groups, etc., and tips for maintaining relationships with our friends and family, because our friends and family and our relationships with them should not always be about MS. Actually, a healthy relationship would not be everything about MS. So we're going to talk a little bit about strategies to improve communication and listening and finding ways to connect. And then how can we make necessary adaptations in our communication to work together as team players and support partners. Because if you are someone living with MS, I know that you need support, but if you're someone who loves someone living with MS, you need support as well. And both of you matter, and both of your needs matter. So understanding MS and its effects on relationships. So MS impacts everybody a little bit differently. And sometimes I use my own examples because it's a little bit easier because I can cognitively think of them really quickly. But then also I know they're just symptoms that many people deal with. So, MS has a variety of symptoms that one can experience, and this can impact relationships. So, for example, fatigue. Fatigue can impact relationships because it may make it where you're not able to do as much or contribute as much, or you need your partner to help, or you need more support. Fatigue can also impact some of your cognition as well, and cognitive fatigue, and that can make communication kind of difficult as well. Sometimes MS symptoms are really hard to explain. So it's hard when you love someone and and you want them to understand your disease, and you can't explain some of it because it's just such an odd, some of the symptoms we experience are kind of odd. And so we know that relationships are really tough to maintain in general for anybody. They're super tough. And when you add a chronic disease or add a disease like MS on top of that, it makes things a little bit more complicated. So it's almost like you have to work a little bit harder to strengthen communication, to be a good team. And so as MS impacts us individually, it also really impacts the relationship. And so in order to preserve that relationship or have a really strong relationship, you have to be very thoughtful about keeping those areas strong. I'll share just a little anecdote from when I first started working with people living with MS. I worked at the National MS Society, and I attended a consortium. My son was maybe like, I don't know, he was like 3 months old or something, and it was in Denver, I believe. But I regress. So I attended a consortium, and I remember sitting in a session and learning about the relationships in MS. And I remember hearing this really baffling statistic, because the divorce rate is really high. But then when you add MS or a chronic disease, then the divorce rate gets much higher. And I remember going to my hotel room and immediately calling my husband and just telling him that, because that data kind of like stopped me in my tracks. And so the information I'm sharing today, the things I want you to think about are, how can we be proactive? How can we be a good team? It's kind of like that kind of thinking, the same thinking that day when I called my husband and I said, I need you to know this because this is really bad news, this information that I heard, and how can we not be impacted in that way? And the truth is that the impact MS is going to impact everybody living with the disease. And not only the person living with the disease, but the person that loves you too. So let's talk a little bit about benefits towards healthy communication. So I want to stress that conversations are the responsibility of both partners. And good conversation skills can be developed with practice. It is really hard these days to foster good communication skills when we're really led by a lot of distraction, a lot of things. Our phones are, the TV's on, there's a lot of things going on. So in order to develop good conversation and communication skills, it's something we have to practice. And in order to practice, we have to be intentional about it. And meaningful and effective conversations with your loved one requires flexibility, empathy on both ends, and the ability to adjust over time. At the same, in the same respect, we want to preserve our sense of ourself, our emotional connections, and reducing the burdens of, of communication on our daily activities. And if we can do that, it's really worth it. So we're going to go into some specific communication tips. So strategies to improve communication. So pick times of the day to have specific conversations. So I know with MS and other chronic diseases that the day to day can be a little bit challenging. But sometimes if we can can allocate time, like maybe like before bedtime, before I brush my teeth, let's sit down and just talk a little bit. Or maybe that's not a good idea with depending on if you're not a good sleeper. But or maybe first thing in the morning, let's have some time where we just sort of talk about things. I know for myself, it's important to have, in my own relationship, to have space that we're not talking about MS and also not talking about parenting, because parenting has really taken, it's for the past 17 years, that's a big part of my life with my husband, is we're both parents. And so we have to pick times to have, to have conversations. Um, there's another strategy or technique that I think has been very effective, that I've encouraged people to do in the past, and something that I do is that at least once a year, if not every twice a year, every 6 months, we set space and time to almost do an assessment of how we're doing. How are things going? How has our communication been? How is our marriage right now? What things do we need to work on? What things are we doing really good at? It's almost like a business meeting, I would say. And then, but that's not the only time we talk about that stuff, but that's kind of like a very intentional, at least once or two times a year that we do. But generally finding time and space to talk, and either trying it daily or weekly, et cetera. And it really depends on what your life looks like. So you set those times and those intentional spaces to talk. Well, when you're talking, being aware of social cues and body language. So if I notice, for example, last night I had a date night with my husband and we went out to dinner, and it was earlier than we normally would go out. And I noticed that he kept picking up his phone and looking at it. He's not a dismissive person. He's a nice guy. But what it was is that he had distractions because he had work. So I wasn't going to talk about anything really big, but I was going to let him attend to what he needed to, and then say, hey, let's kind of refocus again. This is a date night. So being aware of social cues and body language, if you can tell if your partner is really upset, or if you are talking with your loved one who has MS, pay attention to, do they look really fatigued or tired right now? Are they processing things? Sometimes my husband can ask me or start telling me a lot of things, and I'm kind of glazed over because I am cognitively tired at the end of the day. And he doesn't pick up on that social cue, that body language. I'm just tired, so I have to communicate that. So being aware of each other and your each how you may feel. Like I gave you an example where my husband was kind of focusing on work and he was tired and overwhelmed. In a time where, like, I've given you an example of me at the end of the day when I'm cognitively tired and my husband's trying to talk to me. Do you try to find and avoid those areas, but find the good times? But if not, make sure that you're being aware of, are they able to pay attention right now? You also eliminate distractions. Cell phone probably being the biggest one, but depending on what you're talking about, you want to make sure that you're giving the space that you're talking about, the respect that you can talk. And even if it's as simple as, "How's your day been?" Communication tips: always remaining calm. Not getting worked up about anything. Giving yourself a pause or a break. Negotiating preferences ahead of time, so this is about kind of creating that space that can be good for you to talk. And then providing additional time for conversation. Sometimes me and my spouse might get into a conversation and then realize, you know what, we actually don't have time to solve this problem. And so we will make space for that later, and we can table topics for later, etc. And Another communication tip that can be very helpful is to be careful of changing topics too quickly or bouncing around. And so one strategy that is helpful for that is sometimes making an agenda, having just a list of a couple things that you wanted to talk about. And then another thing that you can do is sort of refocus if you realize that the conversation, was starting here but went over here. And that's a very common thing that happens in conversations sometimes. And you don't want to move past something so quickly. But making sure that when you're communicating that you're hearing and you're listening, but you're also feeling heard as well too. So we're going to talk a little bit about adapting communication. Because sometimes with MS or other chronic diseases, we have to adapt communication for our partners. And not only because of MS, but or chronic disease, but sometimes it's good to just kind of use adaptive communication in general. So the first one is using feeling words. And I think that can be very beneficial. And when we adapt our communication to kind of focusing on how you're feeling instead of you statements, you're focusing on I statements, how I feel. And when you're using feeling words, often people can understand. So another way to adapt communication is so we may change our setting or time of day to be more adaptive to being able to have good conversation and connection. Also using tools. I think when there often when someone might be experiencing cognitive fatigue, finding some tools to help, and that might be through like an agenda, or it might be through notes that you've taken earlier in the day. Another way to adapt communication is finding ways that works for you to be able to share the things that are on your heart and on your mind. And then also using technology if needed to help. I've in the past I've been able to share analogies with my husband by using something that I found on the internet or a resource. But also if you're living with I've worked with people that have had difficulty verbally and cognitively with being able to communicate. So we talked about using assistive devices as needed. So and there's assistive technology organizations that can link you to those resources. But sometimes using pictures can help, etc. So it really is it's about kind of what you need and what resources. But if there's something that helps you communicate how you're feeling better, use those tools to help you communicate. And making space for having difficult and open and important conversations. This is not negative. It is not negative to talk about the important stuff. Is it as much as fun? No, not really, but it's necessary. I often make space to talk about difficult or important conversations very intentionally. So I will not talk about them as we're planning out meals for the week. We're talking about baseball schedules or life, etc. I will say, hey, I need to talk with you this week. Can we lock down like an hour to talk about something? And he may want to know what I want to talk about, and that's okay too. We'll definitely do that. So moving on, so self-care and relationship care. So if you don't care for yourself, then it's going to be really hard to care for your relationship. And this goes to if you are living with MS or if you love someone living with MS. So thinking about it individually for you, if you are not taking care of yourself, it's going to be really hard for you to take care of any relationship that you have. And so it's important to maintain your MS wellness if you're living with MS. Doing the things that you can do to maintain your well-being, and if you are a care partner or a spouse, doing the things that you can do to maintain your well-being, and balancing that self-care, and then also caring for your relationships. If we don't care for our relationships and tend to our relationships, they don't flourish as well either. So how do you take care of relationships? That can be a little bit a little bit complicated. So it's usually through intention. Relationships are important to develop, and they're important to maintain. So it's important to know, strategies. How do we develop and maintain healthy relationships? Our next slide. We through effective communication techniques. We also set realistic boundaries and expectations with one another. Communication tends to be sort of the cornerstone of all of this, because with communication, that's how we're able to really develop and strengthen our relationships. But also identifying and managing stressors in our relationships. And those stressors may be because of the relationship and may not be, because we are surrounded by stressors, positive and negative stress at all times. But identifying the things that impact our relationships. Seeking support from healthcare professionals such as a counselor, and that can be an important thing. If you are struggling with communicating and you're not able to create kind of a healthy, safe space to communicate with your loved one, then seeking counseling may help. Also, talking or being a part of a support group might help, because you might be able to talk with other people and find out, or ask, well, how do you communicate with your spouse about this? And while communication is very individual and MS is very individual, sometimes it can yield really helpful to know what other people do and actually where other people struggle as well. At our last MS mental wellness chat, we talked about analogies, because we talked about communication and communicating to our partners, and that was an important thing. And so the reason why, because we got to hear from other people how they explain some of their symptoms, how they communicate some of their challenges, and that was a helpful way to bounce off from one another. So relationships require proactive relationship management. And I want you to think about this as something that you accept. We'll move on one more slide. Accepting responsibility for your part and making your relationship a success. Relationships cannot be one-sided, but we only have control over our part. So in order for the relationships to both work beautifully, we need both people in. This is true with friendships, romantic relationships, and any other important relationship. They take time, and you should keep time sacred, and with all of your relationships, and that's really through being intentional. There's also a concept called small things often. In other words, it's the small positive things done often that often make the difference. So remembering the little, small, everyday things that your partner would appreciate, but may not ask for or respond to regularly. So when you're thinking about it almost as a currency, and for the bank account, emotional currency, that small things, little day, every day make a little big difference. Sort of, I guess I can give the analogy of like Valentine's Day. If you feel loved, throughout the year through small ways, then that is far healthier than on Valentine's Day, someone going out and getting you all these fancy gifts and cards and stuff. It's really the day-to-day that makes the difference, not one time a year. So just remembering that proactive relationship management lies on everybody in the relationship. So also accepting responsibility for your part in making the relationship a success. So there's also a thing called 5 magic minutes. How to know each other intimately. So I talked about setting time during the day. This is a great activity and a good thing to do. So spend a few minutes in the morning talking about your upcoming day, what you have coming up. And then debriefing at the end of the day with a stress-reducing conversation with your partner or your friend, etc. Actively listen to review their day. So don't be listening ready to tell them about your day, Actively listen to hear what really went on in their day. And then finding some way to express admiration and appreciation for your partner every day. Showing affection towards your partner daily, and spending time weekly really talking to each other, asking questions, about your hopes, your dreams, your plans for work at home. Know each other intimately. And this can go with friendships as well, knowing these things as well, being authentic and intentional. But if you can take 5 minutes with someone that you love every day, and maybe it's a couple minutes in the morning, a couple minutes in the evening, or 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening, and just putting in 5 magic minutes of conversation to connect, that really could make a big difference in a relationship. So what is intimacy? This always comes up in relationships, so I am not an intimacy expert, but I do feel like I've been talking about it for a good amount of time now, that at least I can help with communication around intimacy. So intimacy is a lot of things. Intimacy is really it's more than just sex or physical touch. It is about really being able to connect emotionally. There's experiential intimacy, where you may have a trip that you take with a group of your girlfriends, and you have a level of intimacy because you experience that event together. Intimacy, the foundations of intimacy are trust, and is trust. And so when you think of intimacy, often we always go straight to sex. It's not just sex. It is really communication. It is trust. It is experiencing things. It's friendships. It can also be your romantic partner, your spouse, etc. But intimacy is not just or sex. And with intimacy, if you are dealing with physical complications due to your MS, and you are having trouble with physical intimacy, I highly recommend seeing a counselor that specializes in intimacy with couples, because you can build and foster other areas of intimacy in your life that might even be more or equally or more as fulfilling than just physical sex. And so how do we maintain, intimacy? Well, maintaining intimacy, a lot of that takes work. So when we think about, different levels of intimacy beyond just physical, sex, we think about like emotional intimacy, connecting, experiential learning together, doing things. You maintain intimacy when you maintain a sense of good communication, good trust, and good intention as well. And if you notice that there are areas shifting in your ability to trust a partner, or feel the ability to feel vulnerable with a partner, it's important to talk about it. And so maintaining intimacy, it's important to think about as like a collective level on all the areas of intimacy, not just physical touch. And so this slide, what does love look like with MS? I think love looks a lot of different ways. I think in our mind, and I would love for you to think about this concept, to think about, what does love look like? I think for me, I had a date night with my husband, and I'm dog sitting, so I've been in a different state for 2 weeks, and we met in the middle, and we had a date night. Love looked like we both met in the middle, and that's what love looked like. Love looked like when he was feeling stressed about work, that I gave him a couple minutes to kind of take care of what he needed. Love looked like that he brought me things that I was missing, that I needed here at the house for the next couple of days. So love looks like sometimes, picking making sure that at the baseball game that he brings me an umbrella because he knows the sun is going to be really too hot for me, or packing a cooler with cold drinks. Love looks a lot of ways. Sometimes we can focus on love in the romantic sense, but I wanted to think about what love looks like on the bigger, the bigger scene. scheme. I think about love for me looks like me checking in on my friends and saying, hey, I was thinking about you. How are you doing? Or sending them a note. Love can look like having hard conversations, talking about intimacy, talking about MS. Love can look a lot of ways, and I just want to just open that and leave that as kind of a fluid thing, that love doesn't have to look a specific way. And so we're going to move on to questions. And I have no sense of time at all from the terms of the time I've been speaking, but I do know I did more than 20 minutes.
Okay, first, let's thank Jessica for this presentation. And second, I have a couple of questions from online, but I want to take whoever's got questions out here. I see there's somebody out in the audience. We have one hand up.
Okay, there are actually two questions related. I'm single, and so I was wondering if there's any pointers on dating with MS, but also, and I don't know if you'll understand this being related or not, I have major judgment issues when it comes to my relationships with my family and what I will and won't talk to them about, and sometimes that means oversharing with like my daughter. And I wanted to know if there's any pointers there.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you a clarifying question if you don't mind. And how old is your daughter?
She is 18.
18, okay. So sometimes it may feel like we're maybe oversharing or overleaning on certain family members sometimes. And especially if if we're single, we don't have, another partner, et cetera. I think having open conversation with your daughter is an adult, that having open conversation, with her, about what's comfortable to share or not. But I think the bigger thing I think that would be helpful for you that I see is that it would be really helpful to connect with some other people living with MS. And that are that have older have a older young adults that are single, and so the mental wellness chat, I'm just going to plug it because I think it's a really great resource to be able to connect with other people and ask those kind of questions, and we have really good participation, and they answer those kind of questions. But I think connecting with other people to kind of find I think we do have different levels of what we communicate with different people about about our disease, but it's important to have really close friendships and people that you can trust, that you can be authentic about and open about, because this disease is kind of challenging, and some of the symptoms are difficult. In terms of being single and dating with MS, I think that there's sometimes some people might think it's a disadvantage. I think it's an advantage. There's both equal sides to this, but when you're dating with MS, it's there, it's open. I would definitely there are some resources on dating with MS, and definitely look up some resources, but the good thing is that you have that out there already. And if MS, doesn't have to be the focus of everything in your life, you are not your MS, you have a lot more to you, but the right person is not going to, the right person is not going to be judgmental of your MS. And so that's kind of cool that you get to eliminate that. I've worked with people as a therapist before that, MS kind of, their relationship broke up after somebody was diagnosed. And so that is one, at least positive reframing about that. And I've known many, many people to go on and date and get married, et cetera, after their diagnosis.
Okay, thank you for that.
But I think connecting, if you have a support group, you're at a table with people, connect with people.
She says thank you.
I have a question in the same lines. I'm also single and older, much older. And what about disclosing your condition? Because sometimes we don't look like there's anything wrong, and I'm afraid of the judgmental, or they don't want to deal with what might happen. What is your
So that person you don't want in your life anyways. At the end of the day. So one thing I will say is that you can't untell someone. So when you do decide to disclose, and our very last mental wellness chat, and it is on the MSU's new YouTube channel, or it should be on there soon, we talk about this. But you can't ever untell someone. So please know that. Then beyond that, if you decide to tell someone and their reaction is not what you need, and you guys talk about that and you communicate about that, and you're not getting the support that you know that you need and deserve, then that person is not for you. And I think you will know when it's the right time to disclose your MS. We're all a little bit different in how we do it, but I do want to continue to encourage that MS doesn't make you, MS is a bad thing. It does not make you a bad thing. Big difference. And so coming into a relationship with someone with MS is not a great thing, but that you're not a bad thing because of it. And I want you to give yourself that power to know that.
Thank you. I have a question on this side of the room. If there's anybody on the far side of the room, don't worry about me having a problem with my leg. Just raise your hand, all right? Great. Thank you.
So to kind of go along with what the others asked, do you have any tips for encouraging family and friends to educate themselves about MS? Because they do often look at us and are judgmental because we say we feel all these things and they don't see it for themselves.
Yeah, it's tough when we only see what we can see with our eyes, right? So it's kind of really tricky. I highly recommend, and I hope that many of you did this, that you brought people that you love to this program, and brought someone with you. You can't force someone to take on education, but you can invite them to education, and you can provide resources. I think also I've been able over the years to find little ways to help educate people that care about me, that, oh, this is what fatigue feels like, and when a lot of people were having extreme fatigue because of COVID, I was like, oh, fatigue kind of feels like that. Or pregnancy, fatigue that really intense tiredness. But that's just fatigue. So there's a lot of different resources out there. It's important very early on, to share resources. I know in the beginning, I brought my husband with me to some of the MS boot camp programs, and that was, was beneficial. Does he need to go now? No, but if I had a new symptom that I developed and I wanted to share, I would find ways to do that, and definitely going to MS walks and things like that, and it being intentional to let MS be a part of your life and invite those people to learn a little bit more. I think it's really cool when like two spouses or two boyfriends or two relatives can meet each other, and then they're like, oh, that's another spouse and his wife has MS too. And they can, I think through that they can see that other people are experiencing as well. But definitely encouraging education. You cannot force it upon them, but encouraging it and sharing it.
Okay, we have a question on this side of the room.
So my husband's here because he lives with me and he sees a lot of it, but my friends and family don't quite see. And as you look around the room, none of us are in the same cat, you know what I mean? Like everybody, some are in wheelchairs, some look fine, but whatever. You can't judge us by looking at us. Physically, I'm affected, but the brain is really bad. And the question is how do I explain to my family how cognitively bad it is if they can't see it?
So sometimes our family members might be able to see some of the cognitive things. They may, like my family can see when I'm really tired and I can't think of a word. They can see that because they see me being like, oh my goodness, what does it start with? And then it becomes like a thing I'm trying to figure out what this word is. Or if I've taken two words and I've replaced them, exchanged them, and my son will be like, so that is actually a visible thing that they can see, but it can be a really frustrating thing. And so for myself, I think professionally, one is providing information on cognition, and cognitive fatigue, and there's a lot of resources out there that you could share. But the other thing is telling them a little bit how it feels. The other day when I guess the other week, I did something with words that I like mixed up a word, and my son, who's very witty and quick and smart, and he was like, "Why did you say that?" And I said, "Well, I said that's a part of MS cognitive fatigue. Sometimes, I'm tired and it's really hot outside, and it happens. So chill." So, finding the ways and the times that you can explain what that is, I think and what it means. And then, another great thing is that, often I'll pick up my phone and I will be texting myself something, and my family, may or may not, or friends may or may not notice. And I'm like, oh, I just texted myself to do this because I didn't want to forget to do it. And that's, and while I have a really good memory, if I'm really tired, I'm not going to be on my game. And so finding the ways, the processing can be slower. I think one of the, and then I feel like I'll cut myself off here, but one of the biggest challenges I think that I've had with sharing with people personally is the the processing of information when I'm cognitively fatigued. So that makes driving harder for me, and that makes me a little bit more anxious, and being able to describe that is really hard. And so I found a way to articulate it. It feels like I've kind of have been like woken up out of a dream that I was really intensely dreaming, and then all of a sudden, like I'm trying to process everything around me. And anyone that's had a really good nap that's been abruptly woke up knows how that kind of feels, that you're kind of fuzzy headed a little bit. Well, I can feel like that if I'm too hot, or if it's been too long of a day, and so that fuzzy head feeling gets better with rest for me. But sharing those examples, those analogies, can be really helpful to try to explain. They're not going to understand 100% because they're not in your shoes, but you can try to give them the information, and then they can try to meet you with empathy, and that's their choice. Sometimes we don't have to see everything to believe it.
Thank you. I think she says thank you too.
Yes, I was wanting to know, like family, people you run into, they say, "Oh, you look good," but I'm trying to, like when I have cognitive issues, and how can you get over the depression that people don't understand what you're going through? And like you can't get words out right, and you just feel like tiny. And how can you get people to understand, mainly your family? I feel alone in all this.
So one thing I want to share is with all seriousness, I want you to consider going on the MS Mental Wellness Chat that's monthly, because you're not alone. And what you're going to hear every month, I tell people they're not alone. And you're not alone with that. And it does feel isolating and hard. A big help is to connect. You're in a room full of people that I think understand some of what you just said. some of it is knowing that even if you're having trouble with coming up with words, if you're having trouble with your cognition in that day, that doesn't make you stupid, dumb, or anything. You are just as important. It's frustrating, yes, but we have to deal with the frustration. We have to own the emotion of it, but then we have to put it down and say, okay, that's a part of my MS, and what can I do to take care of myself? What is the next thing I can do to take care of myself? Because if we just focus on that we couldn't come up with the word, then we'll never be able to come up with the word. But if we just acknowledge that was really frustrating, but I'm going to let that go now because I know that doesn't determine my value, and it doesn't determine your value. One of the hardest things with this disease is that you could feel alone, and that has been one of the most important things for me for other people, is to help connect them to people to know that they are not alone, and you are not alone. And so I encourage you, get to know your neighbors today before you leave. Find out where your support group is. Sign up for the mental wellness chat. If you do, let me know if you came on, and I'll remember you. And just tell me that you were on the Alabama program. And so write down on a piece of paper right now, I am not alone. And keep it with you, because you're not.
That's true. Thank you very much. Any other questions out there? Wait, let me just check, see if there's any online. I think there was one a few moments ago. And, gosh. All right. Yes, there's two. So the first one is, if the kids are old enough. Oh, somebody was saying something, I guess, to whoever was asking a question. If the kids are old enough, just take them to your next neuro appointment, so that way they could better understand what's going on as well. Okay. Another thing you could do is just turn your family on to our website, because everything you want to know about multiple sclerosis can be found on that website. All right. And it's easy to look at. This is not a corporate website. It is designed by MS patients for you all. All right, to be able to easily and cognitively glide through and navigate your own way through the website. All right. The next question is, person wants to know, and I don't know if you spoke about this already or not, but the person says that if his or her spouse just does not get it during the day, that the person wants to get out and do things, wants to get together with family, wants to get together at sporting events, and is not understanding enough that the middle of the day is just not the right time to do something, how is it best to talk to that person?
So it sounds like there's two different things going on. That there's a one, I think, is finding when is it a good time to talk as a person. And I definitely feel like living with MS, and many of you in the room probably feel this way too, that that there's certain times of the day that are good and not good to do things. I'm not going to be my best first thing of the morning, but nor late at evening, and so finding those right times. So I think it's an awareness of sharing, your making space for those difficult conversations, right? Really being intentional to make space, and your spouse may or may not be able to accommodate some of the things that you want to do as well because of their limitations. I don't know based on the situation, but I can tell you that communicating is the cornerstone of all of this, and we have to make space to talk about hard things. We have to make space to make plans. We have to make space to improve communication. And I wish you well as you continue to talk. But I do think finding a good time of the day a good time to talk about it, and making space to talk about this, because this is big for you, I can tell.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else have a question? If not, let's say thank you.
Alabama, it was my pleasure. I wish I could have been there in person, but I couldn't because of work. But I look forward to meeting you some other time. And please sign on to Mental Wellness Chat if you can next month.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica. Again, thank you everybody for coming. We cannot do these programs without you. And so thank you. Thank you.